Hi, and welcome to the Ed Shed. The Ed Shed is located in between the fort site and the museum, and during the summer when the Ed Shed is open from 9 to 4:30, you can always come by and look at the active excavation sites and talk to the staff. You can go inside the museum and look at all the artifacts, but the Ed Shed is the only place where you can actually interact with the real artifacts from Jamestown in a bunch of tactile activities. One of those activities we're going to talk about today and how it relates to an ongoing project inside the lab. So one of the main activities we do here at the Ed Shed is called picking. Basically, whenever there's a really important archaeological feature that we want to investigate, we will do a special type of screening called water screening, which involves an 1/8" screen on top and then underneath a window mesh, literally the stuff on the backs of your windows to catch bugs. And we use water to pass the dirt through. So the larger artifacts will sit on top of the 1/8", and then the smaller artifacts will sit on top of that window mesh. And as important as the tiny artifacts are, we do this process called picking because they do take a long time to sort out into their various categories. Most of the things that we pick out at the Ed Shed with the public is from the John Smith well, specifically layer W, which is towards the bottom. When the John Smith well was in use, it is obviously being used for fresh water, and things are dropped or thrown in there accidentally or not as often. But then once it is no longer a source of fresh water, it turns into a trash can. And layer W is one of those first trash layers in the well. So all of these teeny tiny artifacts hold a lot of information. It's just up to us and up to the public to come by and help sort this out. The kinds of things we're finding in here is really cool. We have basically every material type you can imagine: rock and brick, iron and pipe, eggshell, and lots of other things. But specifically for this video, we're talking a lot about animal bone. And we have a lot of it in the picking material. Once we sort all these different categories out, they get transported back to the lab, where the lab staff check over what we've done out here with the public, making sure that everything is in their correct category, and then they're able to do some really incredible research with it.
Hi everyone, this is Leah, Curator at Historic Jamestown, and I'm standing in our lab. If you visited us the past few summers at our Ed Shed outside, your work is contributing to this major project here in the lab. So this is where the fun begins for specialists called zooarchaeologists. Those specialists work with faunal material or animal bone, and they have pulled out all of the material from just one layer in the well. Our estimates are showing that we have at least 90,000 bones here on the tables. Some of the finds that you were finding outside in the Ed Shed include things like fish bones, lots of fish vertebra, which are very distinctive and I find really fun to find. Things like gar scales. In fact, one of our zooarchaeologists this morning commented to me that this was the biggest pile of gar scales she'd ever seen. A lot of crab claws, which you might have seen out in the Ed Shed, and numerous other things that are contributing to this assemblage of faunal material. So the first part of this process has been to sort out different types of bone. So we have sections for amphibious bone, amphibians, we have sections for fish, we have trays for small mammals, medium mammals, large mammals, and actually behind me here we even have some sea or river creatures. We think we have some dolphin bones in this assemblage initially. One of our most exciting finds so far has just been the sheer amount of material that we're looking at here. Our zooarchaeologists have also said that typically on projects that they work on, about 30% of the bone is well preserved and about 70% is unidentifiable. But in this case, we think those percentages are flipped. We think we've got about 70% identifiable bone here, which is really exciting. We also are really excited to see just how much local species are represented in this material. We were surprised to find lots and lots of different turtle bones. So that's what's over here. We have turtle shell as well as tiny turtle bones. We also found lots and lots of small mammal bones representing squirrels. So the colonists were eating squirrels, which makes a lot of sense. They're very plentiful here in Virginia. We weren't too surprised to see how much sturgeon we have represented. Sturgeon is discussed in the historic documents quite a bit, and we're seeing lots of remains of sturgeon that were consumed in the early fort period. But what was surprising to us was the lack of large mammal. We were really expecting to find more large mammal. That would be things like cow, pig, possibly even horse that may have been consumed during the starving time. But all we have of large mammal is right here in this tray behind me. We have lots of research questions to be answered by analyzing this material. Primarily, we want to know, what were the colonists eating? This well was filled in with trash after it was no longer a source of fresh water, and that trash probably represents the years 1608 to 1610. So this is a nice time capsule showing us what the colonists were eating just before the starving time and probably during the starving time. We have some documentary record that talks about the colonists hunting and fishing and finding local resources to consume, but we want to know more about what they were consuming and what types of animals they were using. We're also interested to know from this material how much the colonists were being provisioned with imported supplies. We don't have a lot of records for what was on the ships coming over in the early fort period, but we think that they were being supplied with barreled goods. But we also know that they are hunting and fishing locally, so we want to see what the balance is between those two food sources. So the work that we've done so far is very preliminary. We have just begun the sorting process. So our zooarchaeologists are very experienced and knowledgeable with this material. They have done a very rapid sort, just sorting things out as far as they can visually assess what types of animals are represented. But the next step after this will be to use comparative material in order to determine exactly what species are present. So here we are only a few months later after doing our initial sort of material from John Smith's first well. And during that sorting process, we came across a few bones that were a little bit intriguing. We loaned material out to our two zooarchaeologists, and one of those individuals is with me here. This is Steve. He is looking at a lot of the fish bones, and he made a really exciting discovery while he was looking through fish bones, which I hope he can share now. So tell me about these bones.
As I was looking through the material of fish, as Leah had just said, I found a couple unusual bones that looked like fish, but they didn't look like fish. And I started looking at them, and I knew that the parts of were what's called the dietary, or the lower jaw, and the maxilla, which is the upper jaw. I looked through all the collections that I had trying to find these in the fish material that I had. One of the odd things about the maxilla, or the upper jaw, was that the teeth were not conical prey type of fish. Once I could not find them in the comparative collection, I looked through a book of roughly 1,000 fish skulls and still could not find it. So that intrigued me even more to try and look at maybe some images on the internet. I pulled up some images starting with insectivores, which are the smallest mammals that would be there, just thinking that possibly this is what I was looking at. As I was looking, I came across an image that was actually it. When I looked at the name, it said iguana, and this was like iguana this was very surprising because I did not expect to find something like this in the collection.
Yeah, and this is the image
Yes.
that you saw. And so when Steve and Susan got together and determined that they had this iguana, it became clear that not only did Steve have some iguana bones with him, but Susan, who had taken everything that wasn't fish, that's her comparative collection, she also had some elements of iguana. And we don't have those with us here today, but we do have, from a comparative skeleton, some of those same elements. And what part of the iguana are these from, Steve?
This is part of the skull. The upper part is called the parietal, and the lower part is called the occipital. Occipital would be where your vertebrae column comes into attachment there. But like Leah was saying, once we found out, we wanted to double check, so we both worked with colleagues who are also zooarchaeologists, one at the University of Georgia and two at the Florida Museum of Natural History at the University of Florida in Gainesville. One now retired and one a present collection manager. They also all verified that it was iguana, so then we decided it's iguana, we got to tell Leah.
Yeah, it was a really, really exciting morning. Definitely made my day to hear the news about the iguana. And in addition to identifying the bone, Susan and Steve had also started to look at the Jamestown narrative. So some of the earliest records of the colony come from first-person accounts of the individuals who were on the ships traveling over here to Jamestown, individuals who were already here in Virginia talking about what the environment was like. And in one of those records, the very first one we came across was George Percy. George Percy was on one of the first 3 ships that came over to Jamestown in 1607, and he records their route of travel. So they didn't just come straight across the ocean from England to Virginia. They came to the Canary Islands and then up through the Caribbean. And Percy actually records all of these different Caribbean islands that they either stopped at or passed by. And in his record, he writes that on the 7th day they arrived at Mona, where we watered. We also killed iguanas. Iguanas in fashion of a serpent and speckled like a toad under the belly. So, pretty cool. We do have at least one record here that talks about iguanas. And then in addition to that, John Smith records their travels as they came up through the Caribbean, and he records iguanas, and it might be true that they were seeing iguanas on a few different Caribbean islands. So far, this is really preliminary. We've only identified these bones as iguana, but we haven't figured out the species of iguana, and there's numerous species. How many do you
There are
remember?
8 genera, and there are probably 75 or more species. Each of the Caribbean islands will have a specific species, so we're not sure if we'll ever, what we will at this point call it is family, which is Iguanodea. So this is what it would be in our analysis at the present time.
And this is the very first iguana bone that's ever been seen here at Jamestown. So not only was it an unexpected find, it was totally one of a kind. This project that we're working on will go on for another few years. There's a lot of animal bone to be looked at from the John Smith well, and this material is only from one layer of that feature. So hopefully we'll find possibly some more iguana. And thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned as we continue to find more discoveries.